So we're going to move on to detailing. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about creating the typical wall detail for an exterior wall. So we'll start with our architectural building section. I'll show you a couple different ways to do this call out, and then that's going to produce what we call a typical wall section, which is an enlarged view of just your exterior wall. And we use this to show the different layers of the roof, the wall, the foundation, how those things interact. So I'll show you how to annotate this, what information we need to show, what things we need to annotate, what we need to do sort of as drafting field regions, a couple ways we need to update our physical model in Revit to sort of account for some of these things, and generally what are the architectural and construction concerns when we're talking about our exterior wall. Let's get started. So I'm going to show you two different ways of creating these callouts. And note that I have turned off the view template right now, so that I've turned off that filter just to make things a little bit easier. The first way we're going to do it is just create a callout directly from this section. So I'm in section B. If we go up to the view tab and do callout, I can just sketch a rectangle right now. And if you look over here in our project browser, I was in section B. Now there's a new drawing called section B callout 1, and that's this drawing right here. If I double click into it, you can see I've got a new section of this drawing that's basically just showing that portion that I have just I've just basically called out. Another way to get this exact same type of view, so the benefit here is that this is now called out, so any changes that I make basically in this view are going to be updated here. The downside is that if I for some reason delete section B, or I don't put section B on my drawing set for some reason, then that callout is either going to go away or won't ever be referenced in the plan. If for some reason this section doesn't end up on my drawing set, but the callout does, there's not going to be anything in the drawing set that actually references telling someone what that's actually showing. The other thing you can do is duplicate a view and do basically a view reference. So if we want to make a callout, say, of this wall, if we're going to say a callout of this wall, what I'll do is take our architectural plan, I'll duplicate it with detailing, and then I'll use the crop region just to show that portion. Then we're going to have to do some cleaning up. We'll have to do some cleaning up of the view. But basically that view is sort of set, and instead of calling it section B copy, we'll call it section B callout 2. Then we'll come back into section B. We'll do callout rectangle, and before we do anything, we're going to check reference other view. And now I can reference any view that's already been created. And I'll select the one that we just did, section B callout 2, and I'll draw my rectangle, and it doesn't matter. This is now independent, so whatever I do here, basically it's just going to direct me straight to callout 2. So if I double click onto that, you can see I'm brought into that callout 2. So this is helpful, definitely for maybe less so for typical wall details, but definitely for our construction details that we're going to get to when we start looking at how the roof gets detailed and how the foundation system gets detailed. Typical details like that are very easy to key in using this method. And then you see it automatically gets that sim tag, which means similar, which means that this detail may not be literally of this wall, but it's the same condition. If I select the callout, I can do edit type, and here where it says reference label, I can change it. So I could change it to say typical, or I could put it back to sim, or you could leave it blank if you didn't want to put anything in there. Alright, so those are two callouts. I'll delete this one. I'll delete this one because I'm not going to do those views. And we'll start taking a look at how we detail this view right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is drag this view onto a sheet. And you see I've created a new sheet called A500 Details. And I'm just going to drag the callout onto that sheet. And what we want to do is set this to be 3/4 inch scale. So the view scale by default is 1/2. It just makes it the next larger one up, or 2 larger up, but we're going to go to 3/4. And you can see it might not fit on the sheet. In this case maybe it does, but what we can do is I double clicked. So what I just did there is I double clicked onto it. So now I'm working in the view just the same as if I had come into the view right here. And you can see that you get these breaks, right? So I can select, if I select the crop region, anytime I see one of those dashed lines, I can set a break, and then I can basically move, I can sort of crop out what I don't need to see, because if you need to save space, you don't need to show the entire height of the window. In this case, this section is sort of dominated by these really large windows. I don't need to show the entire height of that window if I need to save space. So I can do a break and I can sort of show just the top and just the bottom. And you have to do a break every time you want to make a change. So once I've got that break, I can then use this arrow to move that up and down. And so I'll just continue going through, and this is a little bit of a art and a science kind of thing. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is change the view range or the far clip offset, because I don't need to see any of these things beyond. I'm interested in this wall, how the windows are installed in this wall, how this wall touches the roof and the foundation. I don't want to see that window, that door, whatever else might be beyond. And so that's over here at the far clip offset. And I like to set that to a low number. And if you set it and nothing happens, you can see the far clip offset is set to the same as the parent view. The parent view is the view that you came from. So this is the section. You can see the far clip offset is set to 50 feet. So if I select my callout here, instead of same as parent view, I'm going to say independent, and I can set that down to something low. So selecting it here is the same as sort of being in that view. And now you can see the far clip offset is set to 2 feet. I can't see any of that stuff beyond. I also don't really want to see, when I select my crop region, this inner solid line is the crop. The dash line is the annotation crop, so my text notes and things like that will be cropped at that line. I don't want that because the text notes are probably going to be a little bit larger, so I'll turn off annotation crop. And so this view is starting to get more set up the way I want it to be. The next thing I'm going to do is come into my actual section, and because this is a callout, and you can see now that I place it on a sheet, it automatically got the view reference. Because this is Revit and what I'm seeing in my view is just another view, what I'm seeing in the callout is just another view of this model, I can select all this annotation, all these detail things, and copy those into place just the same as I did previously. So I'll take installation batting lines, I'll take detail items. I don't want to take any model, so no sweeps, no walls, no windows, just annotation things. I'll copy those, I'll come into my section, and I'll paste those in place. And so I'm starting to already build up the model a little bit just based on annotation work that I've already done. So now we just need to start adding text notes, field regions, different annotations. Let's start from the roof and work our way down. The first thing I'm going to do is, since all my text notes are going to be out here on the right, what I want to do is set the, I'm going to put all my story poles on the inside, just so it's a little bit more clear. So if I can drag these in this direction. And so I'm just going to do a text note, and I'll call out to the roof, and I'll say just generally what it is. And then there's no really way to align these text notes except for if you just copy them straight down, they'll be in alignment, then you can just change the leader a little bit. So I'll call out my sheathing. I can call out the roof truss. I can call out the fascia, and remember we called that a 5, I think we called that a 5/4 board by 10. So we'll say 5/4 by 10 fascia, we'll say it gets painted. We're going to need a soffit, which I haven't modeled in yet. So for now, I'll just do a filled region. Basically, a soffit is the finish on the underside of your roof that sort of protects the structure on this part and helps keep your, keeps your building envelope completely sealed. We can go back and model that later, but that's probably going to be in the 3/4 inch range. So I'm just going to draw a filled region for now. There, it's that melon color, so let's set this to white. And then the next thing we're going to look at is sort of starting to clean this up a little bit more. Actually, a couple more things. Let's do the overhang and the heel height. So we talked about this when we talked about the roof structure. So we need a dimension from the outside face of the stud to the outside. Basically, that right there is the end of our roof structure, right? So that 2-foot distance, that dimension matches what we showed on the roof framing plan. And if we double click onto it, I can add a note that says overhang. And then let's show the heel height. And remember, that was that distance from right here, from the top of the plate at the outside of the wall up to the highest point on the truss right there. So that point right there is the heel height. So what we're going to do, there's no way to really dimension the middle of a line. So what I'm going to do is just draw a really small line and set it to one of my lowest line weights, this number 1, and we'll call it like hidden. And I can even half tone it. So that's never going to show up in the actual drawings, but I can dimension to it. So now if I dimension from the actual level up to that line, that should be that 14 inches, which we had set up right when we modeled. And so let's say heel height. If that's too big, we can say HH, and we'll put a key for what all of our abbreviations are later. So now that's showing the information that's needed for the roof guys or for the roof truss manufacturers to manufacture that truss. We can also add in a header, which we haven't really talked about sizing, but we have left basically in between. This blocking right here represents some wood you're going to need to frame the window in. That's your double top plate. I've got 8 5/8 inches left, so I could use basically a 2x8 header if I need more. If I need a stronger header, I could use an LVL. I could integrate the header with one of either of the window framing or the double top plate. We'll just say that a 2x8 is going to be good enough for now. We'll make it a triple. So if I select the 2x6, I'll duplicate it. I'll call it 2x8. We'll set this to be, instead of the thickness as 1.5, we'll set it to be 0.4.5, and I'll set the width to be 0.7 1/4. So that's the depth, or that's the thickness. If you had done, say, 3 2x8s, let's just make it 2. Okay, so that is basically the thickness, the size of basically a double 2x8. Alright, let's keep going down. If I'll just copy this down, I'll say window, see schedules for what that actual window is. I'm not going to call out what window this is because this typical detail is calling out some generic things about the roof, the finishes. If I want to use this detail somewhere else, I don't want to call out what specific window that is in case it's not the same window. And then if we want to show any sort of window flashing or how to actually install that window, that would be in a detail with a larger scale. Alright, so the next thing we got to do, anytime we got a break, we want to put a break line in. And what you can do, I've talked about earlier about doing some different detail components. If you guys have the example file, what you can do is just straight up copy it over. So if you look into the wall section that I'd done in the example file, just take that break line, copy and paste it. And there was a previous video about a bunch of different ways of copying and pasting things in, but this is the easiest one. So what we have here is a detail component that has this break, and you can set the depth, you can set how thick and how wide that sort of zigzag shape is. But basically you want to put it there so that it has this sort of blank region behind it, and then I can go and choose sort of how I crop this view around it, and it just makes a nice break before the next section. And we'll just keep working our way down the wall. So the next thing we want to show is what the actual layers of our wall is. We don't need, this section is that balloon framed wall, so we don't actually need to show where top of deck and top of plate are, so we can hide these. I'll copy this down, and this is a good section. You want to show sort of the layers of the wall all continuous, and so I've got a nice large section of wall here where I can do that. So the first layer is that exterior siding, and in this section is that horizontal siding. If you are confused about what your layers are, you can always go into Edit Type edit structure and see what you have. So I've got the siding, I've got air gap, I've got my rigid insulation, I've got my plywood sheathing, which is going to have the waterproof barrier on top of that. Then I've got my structure, then I've got my interior finish. And so I'm just going to duplicate that information heading down, and all I have to do is just copy my notes down. If I do multiple, I can make a couple copies. And you see I just want everything to be nice and sort of in order. So the next thing was that air gap. The next thing was the rigid insulation, which I think was 1 inch. Yep, 1 inch of rigid insulation. The next was my sheathing with my water barrier. I definitely have to make sure I'm calling that out. And a lot of times you're going to have maybe a specification for this. You're going to have more information than just rigid insulation. There'll be a specification in your project that says what the R value is or what the actual brand name is. Sometimes in a small residential project like this, your details and your drawings will take the place of a specification, but it's always good to make sure that you are having all the information you need. So 1 inch rigid insulation is a good note for your wall, but it might not be enough information to actually get across what you actually are expecting, because that could be anything. If you need a specific brand name, a specific performance criteria, you have to call that out, usually in a specification. So the same thing here. So I'm going to say 1/2 inch sheathing with water resistant barrier. You can also call out a brand name if you're using, say, zip sheathing or sheathing with a Henry Blueskin or some other type of nice water resistant barrier. You're going to have to call that out. And then we can call out our studs. So this is a 2x6 balloon framed wall with our 21 bat. Let's also make sure that we're updating where these leaders actually go to. So I'm just selecting them and dragging them over. And then we can do one more for the interior finish, and we can just say see schedules. If your interior finish is listed on a room schedule, in case it's not gypboard everywhere, it might be, an accent wall or some other type of finish that you want to call out. Let's copy this thing a couple times. Alright, the next major portion we've got to show is basically where the exterior wall meets the foundation, meets the slab. Let's fix these first so that they match what we see out there. So I want to click the leader on that side. I'm going to turn it off on this side. Same thing down here. Alright, and there's a couple things we want to do. You always have to decide in your projects whether you're going to model something or just annotate it. So up here, I annotated this soffit. I'll probably go back and model it later. Down here, we're going to have some insulation. We're going to have insulation under the slab, and we're going to have insulation inside the foundation wall. I think it's good to model it because that's something that's going to show up in every section. So I'm going to fix this now. I can change it right from here. What I want to do is select my wall, and what I want to do is I want to make sure that I make this change to every wall in the entire project. So if I just select and do edit type, it is going to change every wall in the project, but the important thing is that I want to keep the exterior face, I want to keep that face right there exactly where it is everywhere. So if I select my wall, I'll right click, I'll do select all instances in entire project, and I'm going to make sure that the location line says core face exterior. And I can even set it to say finish face exterior, but basically the exterior is going to stay in the same place when I make any changes. So when I add layers to it, that line is going to stay in the same place, and the layers are just going to get added onto the inside. I'll select it, I'll do edit type, I'll edit the structure, I'll insert a layer, I'll make it go down outside the core, and I'll call this one insulation, thermal, and I think that there was already a rigid insulation that we made earlier. A lot of times I like to make the insulation a pink color, just so that it clearly stands out. We'll hit OK. We'll make this, say, 2 inches. We'll hit OK. We'll hit OK. And now I've got insulation in my wall. So I made that change. The only thing I have to do is I have to go and update my model, because now I've got my concrete slab going through basically my foundation wall and insulation. So if I select the actual slab, I go up, find my foundation plan, and with the floor still selected, even though it's not visible in this view, if I do edit boundary, then I can see the boundary. You can see now that insulation is showing up in my foundation plan, which is not a bad thing. And I could just go through and change all these lines so that my foundation doesn't go through basically the insulation. So if I come back to the section, you can see that's what I just did. I updated that footprint. And I'll do the same thing for my slab. I want insulation underneath the slab. So if I change the slab, you can see the level is top of slab. There's no height offset. If I edit type and just insert a layer below it, I can insert that same rigid insulation. We'll say 2 inches. I'll hit OK, and hit OK. And now I've got insulation that I was going to call out, and instead of having to draft it, it's in my model. And so now it's going to be in any detail in any section that I draw. So I'm going to draft a few more things in here. I'm going to draft in basically the grade, since I don't have topo modeled right now. I'll do create a filled region, and I'm just going to draw where we're going to see ground. So I'm going to trace over the outline of my walls, my foundation walls. I'll basically come up to this grade line. I'll give it a slight slope going out this way. I'll come through and I'll trim out that line. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set those two, just like we did in the typical wall detail, I'm going to set those two to be invisible. I'll set this one and this one to be a medium sort of line, a medium solid, and I'll set the actual grade line to be a heavy line weight. We'll hit OK. Of course, it's this melon color, so we need to keep a new grade one. So we'll do duplicate. We'll make earth. We'll change the foreground pattern. I think if you look under model, there's an earth one. Maybe it's under drafting. Yep, there's earth. And I'm going to set the foreground color to be something light. Remember, I don't like it to be super dark because it's going to print pretty dark. So if we set it to this sort of 225 gray, I think that's going to come out pretty nice. We'll hit OK. And there I've got my grade showing. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to show some gravel. We need gravel below the slab. Basically, when this gets built, when this slab on grades get built, they're going to excavate out here. They're going to compact that earth. They're going to pour a gravel bed, compact that. They're going to put down a vapor barrier, they'll put down the insulation, then pour the concrete on top of that. So we're going to annotate that gravel as well. And I don't think there was a gravel pattern. I just looked for it a minute ago. So if you don't have a pattern that you're looking for, you can check out Revit City. You can check out BIM Object for some patterns. You can also just copy straight out of the example project file that you guys get with the course. And so if you look into the detail that I set up for this one already, if I just select basically any fill pattern, anything you bring into the project, I'm just going to copy it over. And then you can check that other video about 5 ways for basically the 5 ways that I covered for copying stuff over. So if I just paste this into place, and luckily this is already sort of the shape and size that I need, I'll set that one up. I'll just bring that right there. You can have a front and back sort of. The Revit is not built in layers, but these filled regions do work in layers. So if I bring this to the front, there now it's showing up over. And then the only thing I want to do is I want to do one more that's going to be right around here. We want gravel around basically the footing. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw one that covers the footing. And then a lot of times you see it sort of has like this, a shape sort of like that. I'll do match type. And then I'm going to set this, I'm just going to move it slightly off because I don't want any lines covering up that footing. If I do edit boundary, I can set the whole thing to be invisible because I don't really want to care about seeing like a thick line around the gravel. But now I can see that there's some gravel around the footing. And if I do one more filled region, I'll set it to be solid white. I'll set it to be a sort of a thick solid line. We're going to want some kind of drain tile right up here. And we're going to start annotating and detailing what all these are, but now I've sort of drawn in what I have. So let's go and now annotate basically over this drawing that we just did. And just again, we're going to copy down our text notes and just try to organize them so they're somewhat nice and neat. Anytime there's wood touching concrete, it has to be pressure preservative treated. So we're going to say pressure treated 2x6 plate. And then we can start calling out these different layers. So this is a 5-inch concrete slab on grade. And you just continue pointing down the different layers. So this is a very generic, there's lots of different ways to do a slab on grade. Sometimes the slab will be continuously poured with the concrete foundation wall. Sometimes it'll go over top. Lots of different ways to do it. This is a very sort of generic method where you pour the concrete foundation wall, you put your insulation in, and then basically the slab on grade gets poured inside of the foundation wall. And you have to remember that the slab on grade is supported by the actual grade, so all the weight of this concrete and the floor is basically being supported by the gravel and the compacted earth in here. The foundation wall is really taking the load from the wall and the floor and the roof system above. So the slab on grade doesn't necessarily have to sit on top of that foundation wall. We're just going to continue using our text notes to call out this basically the layers that we have. We're going to put down, say, a poly iso vapor barrier. We want to also annotate this. A lot of times you want to show your vapor barrier with a thick line that's thicker than what might normally be there. We'll call this one out as, say, 4-inch compacted gravel. We can call this one out as our, what was this, 8-inch concrete foundation wall. We can call this out as our drain tile. Basically, any water that's coming across the foundation, we want to help divert that. So this drain tile will be like a perforated PVC pipe, something like that, that water can get into and then flow out to either side, and just helps relieve pressure on the foundation and the footing. So we can call that, say, a 4-inch perforated drain tile with gravel surround. If you want to learn more about these details, check out Architectural Graphic Standards. I'll put that link on the resources page or on the in the description. And you can also just Google stuff like, slab on grade foundation detail to sort of read more about. There's lots of different ways to do these things. So this is a very generic method right here. And then I'm going to call this one out as the concrete footing C foundation plan, which carries over what I was saying earlier. Call out the structure generically, and then sort of list where else it is. So this is basically what we're going to have for our plan. If I look at the sort of section on the drawing, I'm also going to change it. Instead of section B callout 1, I'll give it a name, typical wall A. Let's see that go away. Alright, so if you do title on sheet, that overrides it. So over here it's still called section B callout 1, but here in the actual sheet it's called typical wall A. That'll be fine. And so this is now complete. What we're going to do then in the next couple lessons is do more detailed callouts. So this is at 3/4 inch. We're going to do some 1.5 inch callouts at the foundation, at the basically roof, and then I'll do another typical wall detail so we can show how the second floor interacts with the exterior wall on a platform framed wall. But this exterior typical wall detail is now complete. If I come back into my section, I can see the callout is here, and then the callout number matches what's there basically on the sheet.